It's beautiful. You had eagles, you have deer, you have elk on the ridge, you have the river, the sound of the river at night. It's soothing. It's like being, you know, in just God's country.
How quiet it is, how, you know, you're not crammed into a residential neighborhood where houses are so close together. You have acreage behind you and, you know, farmers and fields and animals.
We had the means to leave to get the land and the house of our dreams so that we could have horses and give the children opportunities that we just didn't feel that they were getting there in the city.
Maybe not quite the American dream, but you know, it's our dream.
That first flood in '96, I mean, we eventually had to leave. The water was 5 feet high. It was over the countertops. We had to leave. There was no choice. The house was completely destroyed. It was completely destroyed.
A builder came in here and built. These houses never should have been here in the first place. But before they did that, this flooded all the time.
Yeah.
And so I guess the obvious question is, well, why'd you buy here? Why are you here? Well, we were, you know, we weren't kids, but we certainly didn't know. We did not know that this is what happened down here.
When they did tell us that we had to have flood insurance, I said, you know, okay, well, we're only half a mile from a river. That's probably why. And they said, well, you're in what's called a 100-year floodplain. I said, well, when's the last time it flooded? In the 80s. And literally, I thought, okay, I'll be dead by then. What do I care? What do we care? We're going to buy this house.
Since we bought the house, you know, we knew we moved in here that we're near a river and we are in a LAR zone. You know, you're taking a risk, so, you know, we're ready to accept that fact. But since we found out that the levee might not be maintained anymore, it's, quite frankly, kind of scared us to death. If we would have known that at the time that we made the purchase, we would have walked away.
Our plan was, you know, to just have the country life. It's you know, it's beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful, and that is what lures people there.
So when we came to the property, we have 2 little girls, and we toured the property for about an hour, came inside, and then we walked down to the river. It was beautiful. So we just kind of fell in love.
And the Du Bois have recently purchased a house there from a previous property owner. And they're learning a lot about what they bought. The interest that I had really in this property, I saw it had been for sale, and I tried to contact both the real estate agent and the previous owners to give them a clear picture of what the county knew about the road flooding. I knew they had known some personal experience with it, but they also should know about what projects that we've done upstream and how those projects might solve some, but not all of the. And I wanted all this to be relayed back to the new owners.
One question is, are the floods getting worse with time? And certainly in the state of Washington in the last 10 years, we've seen our fair share of big floods. And when November rolls around in December, we tend to get these big floods. One of the questions that Pierce County wanted us to address was, is there new sediment on Mount Rainier? We know that Mount Rainier is a volcano and it naturally produces sediment, but is there an additional level of sediment that is there over the last 20 years when we've heard reports of all these debris flows and extra floods and things like that? So one thing we did is we got our hands on aerial imagery from 2009 and from 1994. And the 2009 imagery shows these rivers. This is the White River, the Carbon River, the Puyallup River system, the Nisqually River system. These rivers are literally visible from space. They're big, wide features and stand out very drastically against the old growth forest within the park itself. But we got our hands on the 1994 imagery and also the 2009 imagery, and we can see that there are changes. In some sections of the river is now getting much, much wider. And that widening of the channel can be taken as an indicator of extra sediment that's moving through there, or even larger floods. And when we looked at the Carbon River in particular and compared the active channel width of the river in 1994 to the active channel width in 2009, we see that in almost every section of the river, the river is now wider than it was in 1994. So.
From what I was reading, the way the gravel sediment settles every year, I mean, it's rising 6 to 8 inches every year that riverbed is. So, I mean, it's only a matter of time if they're not maintaining the levee. And so it's kind of not if, but when.
And there's a new thinking that we've constrained our rivers in the nation too much, and that by moving the levees back from the rivers, we give the rivers a chance to move and evolve, and it's more ecologically sound, and also from a flood control standpoint, better for the rivers. After 100 years of levees, we're seeing that that's not quite working, that the fact of putting levees so close together isn't working with changing conditions.
Buyers that have come in from out of the area or have not lived in a floodplain, to them a picture of a flood is water it's coming. It doesn't mean that the ground shaking, the trees are going over. I've been out on the levees that blew out actually that evening, and the ground, it was like you were standing alongside of a locomotive running, just vibrating. Really gets your attention. They don't understand that.
We weren't really informed about the flooding in the area. We asked the previous homeowners about flooding because it is close to a river. It looks like it's pretty far from when you stand back here to the riverbank. In 2006, which is 5 years ago, there had been a levee that broke at the end of the road, and since then it has been repaired. And so that one time that it flooded that they admitted to, they said that the dam the levee had been repaired, and they're basically alluded that there had been no further problems.
So the Du Bois, a family that just purchased a house out on the Needham Road area, which is an area of the county in the upper Puyallup Basin that has received extensive flooding. Although not many of the homes have been damaged by the flood, there have been cut off from access to their home. They've had to do emergency evacuations where even the fire trucks can't get through the depth of water that's blocking the road. So it's one of those where maybe your house might be high and dry for now, but you can't get to it, or you might not be able to leave. I think a lot of information was relayed to the Du Bois as far as, yes, this area has received flooding in the past. No, the house did not receive any structural damage. But beyond that, it's not a lot of details that were given to them to paint a full picture of just the magnitude of the flooding or the changing nature of the river in that area, where the river could be migrating closer towards the house. And so in that sense, the Du Bois have kind of had their eyes opened a little bit to what they purchased.
Those that live there that have been through a flooding season certainly know what you're talking about. That at one time you got a U-shaped valley, the river was over here, another time it was over here. It may be in the middle now, but next year it could be either side. So you could be way, way away from it, but you're still within the migration zone of the river. Be aware of that. Okay, that's one of the prime things.
But it's so complicated. What we've tried to more get out is give them our phone number. We'll create you a tailored map for your property, zoomed in close enough that you can see your house and your driveway and all the different hazards, flood related, that exist there.
We watch the water creep up from the backyard for 3 or 4 days, and we wait and we wait and we watch the weather and we think, is it going to stop raining? Is the water going to stop getting higher?
I go to work and I'm thinking, okay, I'm at work 11 miles away. I'm there for 9 hours. I know what can happen in 9 hours. You have to go to work and say, you know, boss, I got to be out of here before it gets dark because I've got to park clear down at the corner and walk home in my waders. I don't even know what to say. I think this one would probably tell the entire story. I'm in a boat. I have the 3 cats, all of my important papers, and my husband is pulling the little boat.
When we bought the property, it was a flood zone A, which means there is a possibility of flooding once in 100 years.
The term 100-year flood has been used for a long time to describe the frequency and the magnitude of a flood. And what it's really trying to describe is this is the level of flooding that you could see at any given year, 1% chance that this would happen. It gets misconstrued that this will only occur once every 100 years. So when somebody sees what we term a 100-year flood and then quickly thinks, oh, I'm okay, I'm not going to live here another 100 years, that would be wrong. Each year there's a 1% chance that level of flood will happen.
It was, and we actually went out and we walked the dike an hour before it blew. And it looked fine. We came back to get a few more things, and I was upstairs and I heard the dogs barking. And I looked out the window and I saw water completely across our driveway, but there was this roaring sound. So it's getting louder and louder, and that's when I looked toward the river and I could see the water was pouring. It was coming from the riverside, and it was just like, at that point, it was already 2 feet, and it was just rolling toward the houses. This is the truck we were in when we tried to escape from our house, and it was swept into the trees. The entire truck was destroyed. If we had waited in the truck, we would have went with the truck. We made it across, and we tried to get closer to the rescue people. We just couldn't do it. Where we were standing was waist high, and there was just all this debris coming down from the other houses, and it was just hitting our legs. And we just finally had to go back because we were worried that we would get pinned against a tree, and with the water rising, that would be it. But they were not sure of our capabilities, and that is why they had requested the helicopter.
The Carbon River swelled over its banks so quickly that many folks who live at its edge were caught by surprise. 4 people are trapped inside that van. Their 2 dogs are with them. They tried driving out to safety, but got stuck as the water continued to rise around them. Bring in the Coast Guard. A helicopter rescue team from Port Angeles was called on because the river rescue folks felt it was too dangerous to bring the 4 adults across the raging water that continued to rise every second.
At the time, to get across, it was too deep and too much of a risk to get them across.
So one by one, the Coast Guard helicopter crew lifted the 4 victims to safety. It was a delicate operation because of the heavy currents and because of the heavy woods. This was right in the midst of huge stands of trees. The helicopter couldn't move, otherwise the victims would have snagged in the tree limbs. But all 4 got out okay, surviving quite a scare.
When FEMA said that they had a program to buy this area out eventually and replace all these homes with, and just let it go back to the wetlands, we were definitely on board with that. We didn't want to stay. The reason that we're the last ones here is because we've raised our house so high. We're the highest house on the block. We suffer the least damage because we raised our house so high. So everybody around us is getting bought out.
Buying somebody out is, to me, is the best solution. You're getting that problem out of the public's eye. They don't have to pay that money. It's a one-time expense, so you don't have to pay it over and over and over again.
The good thing was, because such a large number of people were affected and it was a declared disaster, the neighborhood as a whole was eligible then for FEMA buyouts.
Well, the majority of the funding that we've used is a grant program called the Hazard Grant Mitigation Program. The funding split on that is 75% of the money is federal money from FEMA, 12.5% comes from the state, and 12.5% comes from the local jurisdiction, the county.
There was money available for something called severe repetitive flood loss. And we fit that criteria and we were accepted into it. And we are at this date waiting to hear whether or not we're approved.
We get most of our funding for flood buyouts through grants that we apply for. Those grants are a competitive type of grant, so we do a cost-benefit analysis, and only the highest cost-benefit projects get funded for that. And they only really make available those grants after they've had some sort of presidentially declared disaster in the state. So there's a timing when those funds come available, and there's a competitiveness to them.
They send the application for the grant to FEMA, then it goes to the governor, but then the process is they send an appraiser, and the appraisal, it's not like a regular mortgage appraisal. It takes about 6 weeks from start to finish process for the appraisal. And then they notify you, make you an offer, and that's another couple of weeks. And then you have a certain amount of time to make a decision, and if you say no, then you're off the buyout plan.
The paperwork is horrendous. And you have all these meetings you have to go to, and you're just sitting on edge, waiting to find out if it made it through this step.
It does take an awful long time. I will say from putting your name on the list, that is a very long time because we're waiting for nature to hit and create a disaster that will generate the funding, the grants to be released. Many things can slow it down in that review process. What we find is can be like over a year's time to get the approval process. And once that approval process starts, then we go into negotiations with the property owner, and that also can take a long time.
And it's huge. This application, it's not easy, and this is another, yes, it's huge. And people have to understand it doesn't happen overnight. There was one person that did not get bought it. They were on the initial list. They did not get out.
I think the flood buyout program is used kind of as a safety net. If I build my house here or I buy this house here, at the very least, I can be put in for the flood buyout program. And I want them to hear from other people that have participated how maybe that won't meet your expectations.
We were lucky. Our house was still there. The neighbors, they were completely wiped out. I wouldn't live in a floodplain again. 2020 hindsight, I would not have stayed there. I would have moved if I had known now what I knew. We did not lose what other people lost, and it was very hard for us. I can't imagine what it was like for the people that lost more than us, that they didn't have even a shell of a house to come home to.
It's important to really try to send the message, this is more than just what occurs if you live in a floodplain, because most homeowners don't work where they live. They drive across these areas, they shop at locations where roads go to supermarkets, where goods have to be through these areas there. So there is a regional benefit to good floodplain management, both in trying to spend the taxpayers' money wisely, but also keeping things kind of moving in the economy. So do we pay in the best way possible, buy them out, get them out of harm's way, never let anybody build on that property again, and let it flood like nature intended? Or do we just keep going back to the same thing over and over and over again of, okay, let's repair. Oh, we got a new property owner. That new property owner wasn't aware of this, so now we go through the whole cycle again. It seems to me, if we're going to pay anyways, let's figure the best way to use our money.
If and when the county and the state and the government decides that they are going to buy us out, we will accept the offer and move.